Welcome to Discograffiti's 2025 Patreon membership super drive. Now more than ever with our Beach Boys series underway, much of which will be living exclusively on our Patreon platform, this is the time to join. And I'm going to make it super easy for you. At the lieutenant or major tier, in addition to 3 or 4 shows a week, access to the gigantic archive of Patreon back episodes, and your backstage pass, through the month of December only, you'll also get the following. An onboarding call with me during which you'll tell me all your ideas on how to make the podcast you'd like to hear. And whether I use all, some, or none of your ideas, I'll have listened closely and most importantly, gotten to know you. Plus, 3 months into your membership, you'll be eligible to appear on the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound podcast. That's right, an entire episode all about you, your band, your band's album, your band's tour, or whatever other cool stuff you might be up to. And not only do we make the episode, we promote it for you too. Last but not least, you'll receive a completely free digital copy of Metal Machine Muzak, which otherwise costs $11. Metal Machine Muzak is Discograffiti's double album Lou Reed tribute featuring 16-minute pieces by Lou Barlow from Sebadoh and Dino Jr., Corey Hansen from Wand, Mark Robinson from Unrest, and W. Cullen Hart from Olivia Tremor Control. Please tell all your music-obsessive friends. In fact, if your friends do sign up, be sure to email me at info@discograffiti.com and let me know who they are, because I'll be sending you an additional surprise gift on top of everything else as a token of my gratitude. And now, without further ado, the greatest music commentary podcast in all the land, I bring you Discograffiti.
Even though you may want to escape from it so that you become a normal person or you can recreate your own life, no matter what happened, right? You put the television on, you see the Beatles. You put the radio on, you hear the Beatles. You pick the newspapers up, you read about them. They are on everyone's lips, fashion, hairstyle, you name it. Leading the music industry, leading the media industry, leading the PR industry, right? They are the hottest things in town. They're the hottest things in the world. That is the constant reminder around you.
Welcome to Discograffiti, the Music Obsessives podcast that gives freaks like you and me the chance to connect with the brotherhood obsessed with rating the entire discography of every single artist and band that ever mattered. I'm your host, Dave Gebrow, and with 4 new episodes each week, you're going to gain a comprehensive knowledge of an act's history and output in the time it takes to listen to one album. Each new guest swings a hard left into an area you either had no idea you needed to know about or know all about and can't believe you're not alone out there. And in this episode, we'll be turning our spray cans on the Beatles' Pete Best, along with our special guest, the Beatles' Pete Best. Here's just a few of the many things Pete and I discuss in this podcast. Details of the Casbah Club's reopening as an Airbnb destination, an exploration of the 6 possible reasons for Pete's dismissal from the band that became the biggest cultural force on planet Earth within weeks of his sacking, and an in-depth examination of the survival skills that allowed him to deal with the explosion of Beatlemania. If you're a Beatles superfan like me, you'll want to turn this free version off right now and opt for the director's cut of this episode on our Patreon page, which features 10 additional minutes of essential material. And you can find it in our Patreon shop for mere pennies at patreon.com/discograffiti/shop. Or better yet, just subscribe for access to the complete versions of all our shows. I recommend the Lieutenant tier at the very least, so you can access those director's cuts, but the major tier is what you want if you want it all, including, for you true music lovers out there, a guest-packed cornucopia of off-the-beaten-path episodes, and the more obscure the better. Even if you're on the fence, just head over there because it's finally free to become a basic member. Coming up, we've got the launch of our Beach Boys series And Your Dreams Come True, featuring guests like Al Jardine, David Marks, Marilyn Wilson, Carney Wilson, Don Was, REM's Pete Buck, Scott McGahee, Yola Tango's Ira Kaplan and Georgia Hubley, The Cars' Elliot Easton, Sonic Boom, Don Fleming, Marshall Crenshaw, Lenny Kaye, Bill Medley from the Righteous Brothers, Russ Titleman, Jerry Schilling, David Beard, Dominic Priori, David Leaf, Don Randy, Rob Bonfilio, Stephen Kalinich, Fred Vale, and many, many more. So don't miss out. Open up your listening app right now and subscribe. And away we go then. Here on Discograffiti, we've featured all kinds of guests who are well known for what they've done. Today, I'm honored beyond belief to have on the show a man renowned for what he never got to do. In fact, it seemed at times that the universe was conspiring against him to stop him from doing it. Yet there's no question about whether he's triumphed. His is a story of survival and resiliency, of picking up the pieces and moving on, and not simply allowing life to happen to him. In Liverpool, his many fans knew him as mean, moody, and magnificent, especially the Byrds. And my guess is it was those very traits that allowed him to give failure a black eye when it attempted and failed to have its way with him. If you count yourself amongst the wise who rate a life by how one responds to adversity and not by the units one moves, then this man gets a hard 5 stars. He mocked Chow in Mach 1 of what many consider to be hands down the greatest band of all time. And frankly, if he never existed, it's entirely possible they never would have either. Lads and ladies, it's the guy before the guy. He's been down but not out, 'cause long shots never say die. The original drummer of a band called the Beatles, Pete Best.
Lovely to meet you, Dave.
Lovely to meet you too, my friend. Now, I have to say, I just want to say it straight out. I have experienced in my life what I consider to be enormous failure. There's been a number of instances where I have come smack head on into a brick wall. You know, right out of college, I made a film. I got $100,000 together as a 22-year-old, $60,000 in cash, $40,000 on credit cards, got all my friends together. I went to film school, so I made a movie, got halfway through production, and we had to shut down production, and I failed. I know what failure feels like, and it really hurts. And I know that it's something as a concept, you know, I'm not saying that you are, because to me, you're not at all. But as a concept, I know it's something you've grappled with. And so your story is one that is way more interesting to me than any of the guys who stayed in the Beatles throughout the 60s. For that reason, that there's this extra layer to it. And, you know, my first memory ever, it's like there was just darkness. You know, it's like the film started and I'm looking at Beatles album covers. I knew about you the moment I was kind of aware of anything. I was aware of you, just like probably a lot of the people on the planet. Okay, it's Thursday, August 16th, 1962, and it's 11 a.m. You've been a Beatle at this point for 2 years and 2 days. You're sitting in an office in NEMS Enterprises in Whitechapel, Liverpool. With you is your good mate and Beatles driver Neil Aspinall, right? He's in the office with you? Okay.
Yeah.
Across from you sits Brian Epstein, more fidgety than usual and noticeably not making eye contact. Do you remember thinking, why was I summoned here?
Yeah, that basically it was because prior to Brian taking over the business, I'd handle the business side of things. And it was very much a case of, you know, a brain picking session. You'd used me before. So these types of, you know, impartial meetings were very much a case of checking promoters out and prices that we should pay. And I thought it was just going to be another headbanging session with Brian.
Okay.
Not realizing that, you know, 15 minutes into being in the office, you know, my sojourn as a Beatle had finished. You know, it happened as fast as that, basically.
So a few minutes later, you walk out of Brian's office and you close the door behind you. Do you shut it or do you slam it?
I just left it open because Neil was walking out behind me. Yeah.
Okay, what's the bigger turning point in your life? Being asked to join the Beatles or being asked to leave?
I think being asked to leave because being a naive teenager, okay, smitten with the rock and roll idiom for success, being actually kicked out of the Beatles, that departure from the Beatles was a turning point in my life where I had to realize pretty quickly that, okay, you're no longer this naive kid who's enamored with rock and roll. You know, you've got to reestablish and reinvent yourself and recreate your life and dispel the myths which have been or would be put out about you. So once you come and you get to that realization very, very quickly, I think that is the turning point in your life because you've lived your life for, what are we, 1962, so nearly 21 years on the planet. And then all of a sudden, your direction's going in one way. And because something which has happened, which you've got no forewarning at all about, your life suddenly takes another, as you turn around and said before, you hit a brick wall and then you take a left. It goes that way. So you do basically have to reinvent yourself and come to terms with the situation very, very quickly.
Do you remember what was going through your mind as you walked from the office to I'm assuming it was the Beatle van that you drove?
Yeah, because Neil had driven me down.
What's going through your mind? Do you remember, or was it so frenzied that you just don't remember the thoughts?
No, it was basically a case I walked out the office. There wasn't much going through my mind, to be quite honest, Dave. Simply because of the fact it was a case of you'd gone and been on top of the world, and all of a sudden, you know, you're told in no disparaging terms that, you know, the lads don't think you're a good enough drummer for the band. They no longer want you in the band, and it's already been arranged. And I think that was the key word, already, which meant that there'd been prior, okay, whatever was going on behind the scenes to be a prior time where I wasn't privy to it. So it was very much a case of, you know, leaving that office. I'd gone in this like happy-go-lucky young kid with the future recording contract, blah, blah, blah. And I came out with basically nothing. It was basically 1 minute you were top dog with the top band in Liverpool, you know, the Kings of Liverpool. The next minute you're crawling out through Epstein's office.
Right.
You know.
And I'm curious, you know, because you just mentioned before, you know, you kind of were double dipping as a drummer and a gig securing promo man. You were almost like a quasi manager. And as I'm, you know, assembling all the research for this interview, it kept striking me if it was possibly a subconscious bid to make yourself irreplaceable to the group because you were feeling the impenetrability of all these guys' friendship, which preceded you coming on the scene. And you're kind of by all accounts, you're a shy, reserved type. And you saw that you were maybe able to fill a void that they weren't able to.
No, well, let's just put that one into perspective, Dave. Okay, this is media which has created something. Okay, if people know me, right, or have known me, and even know me from when I was younger to, you know, life at the present moment, yes, there is a reservedness about me, okay, but it's a politeness. It's not because I'm afraid of being a person. And I think that's what the media's tried to create. Here's this guy who's naive, for want of better expressions, doesn't speak, doesn't communicate, is a loner, right? Whatever other despicable thing they could call me, right? So identify and try and segregate me from being one of the lads. For those people who know me, yes, there is a reserve in this, but it's a politeness. I'm just as mad and crazy as the next guy. Okay, there are times when you do it and times when you don't do it. You know, I'm a human being. It's one of those. I live my life. I have my own wit. I have, you know, a Liverpool sense of wit, which, you know, people enjoy. I enjoy a pint. I'm a Scouser, right? At the end of the day, you can't take that away from me. You know, I'm a born out-and-out Scouser who enjoys my time in Liverpool.
The word shy and the word loner are not pejoratives to me. My wife, who I love with all my heart, is both of those things. And there's aspects of me that I feel, you know, that I have as well. See, I don't take that as a pejorative.
No, I'm using that simply as a graphic illustration as to what media can do. So put you into a box. Look, here's John, George, and Paul who are like there, right? But here's Pete who's there, and the two don't mix.
Right.
You know, it's like blood and water,
right,
or blood and wine. You know, they do mix, but one stays on top of the other.
All right, so you and Neil walk out, you get in the Beatle van, And a little background. You'd been close friends with Neil Aspinall since 1961 when he had rented a room in your family's house. Then when you became a Beatle, you got him a gig as the band's road manager and personal assistant. So did it make it even more difficult knowing that you had secured a gig for Neil that brought him reams of success over time and that it was all because of you? And I mean difficult in the long term.
No, that was I got to know Neil from 59, the fact that he moved into the family residence at 61 is immaterial. But basically, he took over, for the want of a better expression, being our roadie, because the guy who used to do it, Frank the Bouncer for the club, right, for the Casbah Club, couldn't do it anymore. It meant that he couldn't keep his eyes on the door as well as from the Beatles because we had more gigs coming in. We were out every night. We were playing every night. So I went to Neil and said, okay, how do you feel about taking over as roadie, dropping us around, make yourself a few more bob? And he said, yeah, and he went and bought himself a little cheap van. And it served its purpose. And basically what happened was he stayed in that role. So in the end, when Brian Epstein came along, they needed a full-time road manager, right? And it seemed appropriate that Neil had been driving us around for years, right? Walked straight into that job, so I think it was very much a case of, I don't credit myself with giving Neil that job. Okay, I think it's something which fell in his lap. He wanted to do it. If he didn't want to do it, he'd have basically gone, no, it's not for me. He enjoyed doing it. He enjoyed the company. He enjoyed life on the road. He progressed well. And, the success that came to him because of that infantile beginning as, a basic road manager, heading up as, CEO in charge of Apple. Well, credit to him. He deserves every success which he could get.
Only Three Lads is a fun, lively podcast hosted by indie musician and nerd Brett Vargo and radio personality Uncle Greg, with a variety of third lads guesting. The show celebrates all facets of alternative music from the 70s, 80s, and 90s, from punk and new wave to power pop, synth pop, Brit pop, indie, and more. While Only Three Lads is partially an interview show, it's more about music fans coming together, with each episode focusing on a different top 5 discussion topic. For example, top 5 Motown-influenced songs, top 5 Saturday night albums, and top 5 songs of 1978. Only Three Lads is charted among the top music commentary podcasts in over 60 countries around the globe, and has been named as one of the top 15 alternative music podcasts you must hear by FeedSpot for 4 years in a row. To date, they've showcased an awesome roster of musicians, writers, filmmakers, comedians, photographers, and fellow podcasters who've shaped and or been shaped by the music we love. Among them, Graham Parker, Robin Hitchcock, Jeff Murphy from Shoes, Mickey Berenyi from Lush, The Primitives, The Darling Buds, Heavenly, David Gedge of The Wedding Present, Robert Vickers from The Go-Betweens, Steve Wynn from The Dream Syndicate, Tony Valentino from The Standells, Vanessa Briscoe-Hay from Pylon, Love Tractor, Hugo Burnham from Gang of Four, Twin Tone Records' Peter Jesperson, the manager of The Replacements, Ira Robbins from Trouser Press, and many, many more. Join the Only Three Lads community on Facebook, Instagram, X, or Blue Sky, and let them know that Discograffiti sent you. And if I may, Brett and Greg are a couple of great guys that work their asses off on their show, and it shows. I love the kinds of guests that they get. These guys go to the mat for what they believe in and what they say, and I really love them for it. You should definitely check Only Three Lads out. A lot of people don't realize, I know for me, before I got married, every relationship I've ever been involved in, when it comes to an end, I'm deleting all my pictures of that person. I'm trying to wipe them from my existence. But what a lot of people don't realize, and this, when I think about stuff like this, I think that your character, in terms of who you are as a person, what you had to go through to actually work through this situation is beyond most people's ability, because Neil continued being John, Paul, and George's right-hand man, while not only being your good friend, but living with you and your mom and your now 26-day-old brother, And the fact that Neil would cart the boys' guitar amps back to your house every night and place them right there in the hall for safekeeping. So did that help you to process the situation quicker, or did it only rub more salt in the wound, especially those first few weeks where you're trying to do everything you can to move past it?
No, I don't think, rubbing salt in the wound is most probably the wrong expression, Dave. That's like, Neil's been responsible for something. And he wasn't, he was the innocent party who got drawn in. I've been called collateral damage. He was collateral damage as well, as far as I'm concerned. Okay. But because he made a conscious decision and because, I basically turned around and said, look, stay with them. They're going to go places. He made the right choice. But at the end of the day, he could have easily walked away and turned around and said no. But he felt comfortable. He'd given up being an accountant or a trainee accountant to actually become the road manager. So I suppose that was one sacrifice which he'd already made, and he was quite prepared to continue. That was a new avenue for him, and that was going to be his new fortitude. But no, it didn't rub salt in the wound, the fact that he came back every night, because I think it made it more apparent. Neil and I had an understanding. We were great friends. We were still great friends up to the day he died. And I still have great friendship for him and great respect for him. And I always will, because of the close relationship we had, through my brother Rogue and through my mother Mona. Okay, the affair, it wasn't a sordid overnight affair. It was a love affair that lasted many years. And I need to make that quite clear, because a lot of people think it was just a little hot, sordid soiree, and it wasn't. Okay, there were two people who fell in love.
I never got that notion. But also, your family is a unique one. I mean, every one of Mona's children, you guys had different dads. It wasn't just like, this came out of nowhere. This is a close family, a very close-knit family that just came about in a way that was maybe not traditional. But, the whole story of Never Say Die and, the long shot, being able to get you Hayman's Green and all the backstory is all unique and unusual.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, circumstance. It's one of those, Mo had 3 sons, different fathers.
And what you had said before about advising Neil, no, really, you should stick with these guys. They're going somewhere. From what I understand, that happened almost immediately. You and Neil went to the Grapes pub on Matthew Street, same street as the Cavern Club, which was a mainstay for the Beatles. And Neil was, by all accounts, talk about a loyal friend, totally empathetic with your situation, and he was pissed. And so he threatened to quit, and you're the one who convinced him to stay, right?
Yeah, I don't dwell upon that fact. It was, me giving a good friend a little bit of, advice. I hear what you're saying. The pair of us don't have to go down in the sinking ship. One of us can survive. And you're going to be the one who survives. I'll reinvent myself. I'll find a life raft somewhere else and I'll jump into it. Well, you stay on the ship and you'll sail away a happy guy. And, because of that and the fact that, okay, as time went on, Dave, you got to realize, you become aware of the situation. When you walk out of that particular office, at that particular moment in time, you are not functioning to the best of your ability.
Right.
Your brain has been sideswiped. Right, you're gasping and you're grasping at trying to find out what you've done wrong, not what they've done wrong or what they've done, what you've done wrong. Okay, so you're trying to crucify yourself as to what have I done wrong, which has led to me being kicked out of this band. And that's the turmoil you go through. That is the turmoil. Okay, it's your own self-crucifixion. That's trying to analyse why all of a sudden after 2 years you don't fit that band anymore. You become an odd piece of the jigsaw puzzle and thrown away. That is the turning point. You think to yourself, okay, I'll get over this as fast as I can. It doesn't happen as easy as that.
Yeah.
Because there's constant reminders around you all the time. You've got your own fan base who are constantly for weeks afterwards doing demonstrations. They're phoning you, they're sleeping in the garden. They're asking you, go back into the Beatles, why did you leave, right? Because they don't realize themselves, what has gone on, as well as me being perplexed, what the hell has happened. To a certain degree, the fan base was as well.
Right.
Because it was like what was put out was that Peter left the Beatles, right? And they couldn't understand that. Why would I leave the best band in town? So that was, that was the question they were asking, so there was a lot of perplexity amongst the fan base as well. They showed admirable support.
That stuff is amazing to me, knowing George actually got a black eye from somebody who was a big Pete Best fan. But I want to freeze time for a second. It is entirely conceivable that no one person in the history of time has been asked to replay the events of any one situation more than your sacking from the Beatles. And there were two people in that room, or three people, one of whom never really addressed it for emotional, professional, and legal reasons, that being Epstein. And in all the interviews I've heard with you, you describe your firing in almost the exact same way like I describe a car accident I had 22 years ago. So with any traumatic experience, and I've had a whole bunch, not just that film, a bunch of car accidents, a whole bunch of stuff, but I find the best way that I can to tell the story. And then I let the same words in the same order tumble out of my mouth in exactly the same way every time to avoid having to live through the trauma for 1 second longer than I already had to. So how do you re-experience all this craziness that you experienced within 5 or 10 minutes? Does it come at you in dreams or any other ways? How does it get at you?
No, it wasn't a case of recreating it. I mean, it was constantly there. I think recreation is a word which we can bandy around, Dave, for want of a better expression. I would say now to say constant reminders as opposed to recreation, simply because of the fact you've got to realize that very quickly after my demise from the Beatles, right, Love Me Do was released. And I think in October 62, somewhere around about that, late 62, that crept into the bottom end of the charts. Now that, to me, was the proof that the belief we had in ourselves as a band was starting to come to fruition. That was I won't say now to say a sour point, but that was a recognition, a realization that you could have been part of that, or you should have been part of that, right? That's the constant reminder I'm telling you about that keeps coming up. Okay, it's not a nightmare. It's just you want to move on from it, right? But because of circumstance, what's going on around in the world, and will eventually go on in the world, all of a sudden within a short space of time, and you've got to admit, it was in a very short space of time. They are suddenly number one in England. They got multiple hits. Everywhere they go, it's Beatlemania, right? 64, they conquer America. The story goes on. They have become musical history, the legends of musical history.
People take for granted Lennon and McCartney like they've been famous their entire life. But when you were in the band, you were a Beatle for 2 years and 2 days. For a year and 9 months, they weren't even songwriters. They were just performers. They weren't even writing music. They had written music before there was the Beatles. They kind of kicked around a little bit, just effing around with it. But then when the Beatles started, you guys were performers. Then Love Me Do and P.S. I Love You and Please Please Me, those are really the only songs that you were kind of there to see. And so these guys were more performers than they were the legendary Lennon and McCartney, so you were not in this huge band. You were locally maybe, but within, about 2 months from when you walked out of NEMS Enterprises to where I think your first job was loading bread into the back of a van. What I had read is that that's the moment when you heard that they had their first number one.
Possibly, it's around about the same era. Yeah, okay.
I know at the time, you guys used to do that routine, where are we going? To the toppermost of the poppermost. And it was like a pep talk, like a cheerleader pep talk. But what it turned out to be was a prescient vision, almost like a psychic would have, of actually knowing where they were going. But cruelly, you didn't get to share in that vision.
Yeah, I think that where you were using the word recreation before, right? That's a constant reminder, right? Because it was apparent, it was around it, even though you may wanted to escape from it, right? So that you become a normal person, or you can recreate your own life, or move forward. No matter what happened, right? You put the television on, you see the Beatles. You put the radio on, you hear the Beatles. You pick the newspapers up, you read about them. They are on everyone's lips, fashion, hairstyle, you name it, leading the music industry, leading the media industry, leading the PR industry, right? They are the hottest things in town. They're the hottest things in the world. That is the constant reminder around you.
So point blank, I have to ask you, were the 1960s just a sick fucking joke? Oh, hi, I'm Dave Gebrow. I threw my career as a licensed hearing instrument specialist in the trash, sold my house, and moved to the East Coast with my wife and 5-year-old son in order to focus on making the ultimate weekly podcast for music obsessives thrive. But weekly wasn't enough for me, so I bumped it up to 4 shows a week. Becoming a subscriber to Discograffiti's Patreon gives you access to hundreds of exclusive episodes. As a 2-show-per-week private, you get the weekly show by and for our Patreon family, the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound podcast. As a 3-show-a-week lieutenant, you'll get early release, ad-free, extended director's cuts of the main show. They're the shows as they were intended to be heard. Plus, you'll gain access to half the Patreon archive and the upcoming Beach Boys Behind the Mirror companion episodes, which will feature dozens of special guests from within the Beach Boys camp talking about and rating their music. But as a 4-show-per-week major, you'll be drowning in a flood of must-hear binge listening, because I'll be bombarding you with episodes about super cool bands that are too subterranean for free Fridays. It's like going to music college, but with a tuition that makes all kinds of sense. Plus, our entire Patreon archive is yours. Discograffiti's Top 10, our Buried Treasure show, Rock Cousteau, our Slag Off show, Queasy Listening, and the Private Press with Paul Major. And all that for the price of only a cup of coffee a week. Times are tough, you say? Fret not, because there's a $1 tier. Or you could just join as a basic member and buy episodes piecemeal from our Patreon shop. Don't risk feeling badly about yourself by not giving. Check out patreon.com/discograffiti to find the tier that's right for you. Once again, that's patreon.com/discograffiti. I mean, I know for me, I'm a sensitive person, and it would have been torment. Like every second, to be quite fair, you probably have a more stable constitution than I would have, because I don't know if I would have made it through the 60s having to deal with that.
Yeah, but that goes back to the strength and the backbone of the family. Okay, the upbringing you have. Unfortunately, with my mother Mona and the guidance of my father, they are determined people. That is a gene which all the brothers have inherited. The family is inherited. Okay, that is the backbone. That is what keeps the best family. That's what maintains us, right? It's like if people dump on us, you can dump on us, but life will go on and we will rebuild again. And that's exactly what happened. And I think once you get to that situation, Dave, and that's what I was getting back to the point, there comes a time when it's like, stop thinking about that. That's just taking you back into the past, which you're trying to escape from. Once you come to terms with that, and you realize it's about today and tomorrow, that's when life begins. That's when you suddenly turn around and say, my karma, that's happened. I didn't know it was going to happen. But my karma has now pointed me in this direction, right? I don't know what my karma is going to end up in, but let's go down the path. And it's very much about today and tomorrow. As you move down that path, you realize maybe it did happen for a reason.
Another quote that I love that you've said is, I'm a survivor. I enjoy the fact I'm a survivor, and I enjoy every day twice as much as the day before. Was that an outlook you were born with, or did that happen as a result and a consequence of what you went through?
I think it's a multitude of everything. Okay, the self-belief you have in yourself, what you went through, your family upbringing, your own strength of character, your own backbone. Yeah, it's a multitude of everything. That personifies the person, and it gives you driving force to move forward, and not stay stagnant and tread water. Because if you're going to tread water for the rest of your life, and you've got no ambition and you've got no determination, right, then life becomes very mundane. When you have a challenge, right, and the challenge is you want to prove to yourself, you want to prove to people, and, you suddenly from living your own life, become a role model for people to draw inspiration from. That is through your own endeavors. That's through your own backbone. And I appreciate people for, blessing me with that thought, that I have inspired people because of the ordeal that I've been through.
And in fact, professionally, that was what you gave back. I mean, for decades, that's what you gave back in your job. I mean, talk about an apt profession which we'll get to. But yeah, I'm curious about this because I've never heard you address this. Do you think if Stu Sutcliffe hadn't have left the band, that he would have been sacked before you, after you, or not at all?
I don't think Stu would have been sacked. There was talk that when we got the recording contract with Polydor, right, there was a conscious decision that we thought Paul may have been a better bass player for the recording. And we were, again, pondering with how we were going to tell Stu. He wasn't out the band, but we were going to use Paul to record with Sheridan. But then Stu saved us that problem by turning around and saying, guys, I'm quitting the band. I'm going back to Hamburg College of Arts. I'm, falling madly in love with Astrid Kirchherr. And I'm going back to what my ethos is, which was to being a fantastic artist. So that problem was alleviated. And the fact that he'd moved on, that particular door was shut. But I think that if Stu hadn't made that decision to go back to Hamburg College of Art, okay, which stopped us having to make a decision, I still think he would have played in the band, okay, and Paul would have been used as a recording medium because he was, e.g., a better bass player, okay. I'm not turning around and saying Stu was a bad bass player, because I've defended his corner for many, many years. Stu was a very simple bass player, and rock and roll was very simple. I
want to focus for a second about a few potential red flags that you may or may not have noticed up until that meeting at NEMS Enterprises. So that pocket of time between when it was decided you were going to be let go, but before it had happened, Brian Epstein had kept the news from you that EMI had signed a recording contract with the band. And apparently it was due to possible legal issues if you'd known of it. Do you remember when you found out that they'd kept that from you? And did you think anything of it? You must have had some inkling that was messed up or some seed planted in your mind by that point.
No, okay. Well, again, that depends which media artifact you go to on this particular one. People have got to remember, when we were out at the Star Club, and I'm talking about April 62, we got a telegram from Brian Epstein, which turned around and said, I have got you a recording contract with EMI. I have got you, whatever the expression was, start rehearsing and recording your material, okay? Because we had a date set to record, okay? We weren't told there was an audition. We were told we had a recording contract. There's been that many conspiracy theories, and since then people have researched the Dave and gone on about it, and they verified the fact that yes, a recording contract was signed, right? But that was the time I was with the band, okay? People were trying to turn around and say, okay, this has been kept away from you because even at that stage, they're thinking of trying to get rid of you. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't. I don't know. I wasn't privy to that. But the fact was that recording session, that recording contract was signed while I was still in the band.
And then also Joe Flannery, who was the manager and producer of Lee Curtis and the All-Stars, he came to your home and, correct me if I'm wrong, he told you that he had heard that it was about to go down. And the reason he did that was because he wanted you for Lee Curtis and the All-Stars. And then when you approached Brian about it, you caught him off guard and he denied it. But at that point, there must have been some paranoia, no?
Well, when you get a stranger knocks on your door, right, and basically turns around and said, I believe you're leaving the Beatles, you're interested in joining my brother's band, it's a little bit like, are you cooking? Where are you getting this from? So yes, there is an element of doubt. And you go to your manager to clarify. It's like, where did this come from? Am I treading on icy ground? But as you so rightly said, Epstein basically turned around and said, no, we had got nothing to worry about.
Did you believe Brian or did you believe Joe at that point?
Well, I was disbelief with Joe simply because of the fact, why am I leaving the Beatles, right? Why do I want to join your band when I've got the best job in town, right? And then just clarification, because there is an element of doubt. Why did that happen, right? So you go and clarify with your manager, and your manager goes, oh, no. Pay no attention to that. Then lo and behold, a couple of months later, boom, right? The shot gets fired and you're no longer a Beatle. So it's like, why at that stage, Brian, didn't you turn around and say, there's a possibility we're thinking of it? Because I think he knew that if he mentioned anything at that stage, my reaction would have been trouble for him and trouble with the boys. It's like, let's get it clarified.
He also didn't want to fire you.
Yeah, so history portrays now, yeah.
Yeah, from all accounts, He didn't want to fire you. George Martin didn't want you fired. They just wanted to probably get Andy White in for the record, just like they did to Ringo. They just wanted to have the same kind of situation.
Yeah, well, George Martin, when we approached him, basically explained that. He turned around and said, God forbid that I was part of Pete's demise. He said, I didn't want that to happen. He said, I was as surprised as anyone else when Ringo turned up. And when he asked, where's Pete? It was like, oh, he's left the band.
It's almost like the Zapruder film with regard to your sacking. There's all these theories, and it seems like there's a total of 6 solid possibilities. One is the rest of the Beatles' jealousy at your popularity. There's a lot that you can say about that, because oftentimes they would, I don't know how often it was, but the other guys would walk on stage to applause, and then you would walk on and girls would scream sometimes. Did that happen?
Yeah, it happened. Yeah, but
I mean, I'm not gay, but you're a good-looking guy. So, I know that Paul's dad actually admonished you one time.
Yeah.
Right? Didn't he come up to you and say, you should...
Yeah, that happened. I think it was the first gig or second gig we did at the Teenagers' Turn, which was the Manchester Playhouse. And I got more fan adulation. I was mobbed coming out the studios. And Paul's father took me to task and turned around and said, why are you getting all the attention? Or words to that effect, Dave. Meaning in as much as let the other lads get a piece of the action as well. Why is it always you that, the fans are picking on? I just went, got nothing to do with me, right? I said, go and ask them. They walked out beforehand, right? If they want to scream at Paul, they want to scream at John, want to scream at George, fine. So I said, most probably the wrong guy to ask. Go and ask the fans.
Yeah.
That was the way we left it, yeah.
I know that Mona really and truly believed that this was the reason, that jealousy was the reason why you were sacked. Or at least she's talked about it at great length, that was the case for her.
That was the belief she had, okay. And she was based on what fans basically talked to her about. The fan reaction that she saw, the reaction from Brian Epstein after dismissal because he wouldn't talk to her. He became non-available. You put all those elements together, and maternal instinct basically turns around and said, well, there must have been something more than just the drumming availability. But she wasn't the only person. Don't get me wrong. Don't make it look as though she was the single person who basically turned around and said it was the jealousy angle. Thousands of people who go on that particular angle. And my answer to that is, Dave, and for anyone listening to the pod, you make your own mind up about it.
Right.
It's nothing like an influence. It's your decision, what you think happened.
And then obviously the second one is that they were dissatisfied with your drumming for whatever reason. The third one, which I'm not sure if there's any basis in fact, is your rejection of Brian Epstein's homosexual advances, which I don't know if that was a thing that had all happened.
Yeah, it did happen. Okay, I wouldn't have talked about it if it never happened. I'm not a person to fabricate stuff, for the likes of media attention. Not so like so many people who, get in the media these days, they fabricate stuff and change stuff just to draw attention to themselves. It's a little bit like, fine, it happened, right? He hit on me. I turned around and said, I'm not that kind of guy, kid, right? Life went on.
Yeah.
I don't think he held it against me, right? Because as you turned around and said he was reluctant to let me go from the band, and I think that became more apparent because even after I was kicked out the band, he did approach me and turn around and say, okay, I've got an interest in signing another little band called Mersey Beats, which were a great up-and-coming band at that time. And he basically turned around and said, I want you to make them into another Beatles. So that was the confidence he had in me.
In fact, they were waiting right outside his office. Right after your meeting, you walked right by them. Yeah.
That's right, Billy and Tony, yeah. But that's the belief he had in me. Okay, it was like, fine, take this up-and-coming band and do what you did with the Beatles. And that was the reason why I refused. And I told Billy and Tony many, many years afterwards when we were talking about the subject. And I said, that was it, basically. Nothing against you personally, because we're still great friends. We're great musos. I said, it was nothing against you personally. I said, but I've just been kicked off the number one horse, right? And Brian then expects me to go back 2 years to the beginning and start all our hard work again to recreate you guys. And he's got the belief that I can turn you into a second Beatles.
Right. And you'd have to start at all the same clubs that you worked your way out of prior and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So it's a little bit like, I appreciate what you're offering me, Brian. But if I am going to recreate myself and rebuild myself, I'm going to do it, not under your statement. But I flagged that up, Dave, simply as the fact. A lot of people turn around and said, you possibly mentioned it before, because of my rejection of Brian as regards his homosexuality. I don't think he held that against me, right? Simply because of the fact that he held it against me. Once I was out the stable, why would he approach me to basically turn around and say, come on, guys, send the Mercy Beat since I was second Beatles?
Well, he was contractually obligated to you as well.
Yeah, but contractually obligated to the Beatles, not to anyone else.
To you as well, personally.
Yeah, but I'm still part of the Beatles, contractually was, okay? You can't just basically take me out the contract and go, okay, I'm still looking after you, because as far as the contract's concerned, I'm still a Beatle. You with me?
Yeah.
Again, it's another of these conspiracy theories. People have their own ideas about it. Media has their own idea about it. Media puts a different slant on it. People turn around and say, yeah, Brian held a rejection against you. It was animosity because you rejected him, blah, 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 blah.
I mean, I thought that one was the least likely to have been foundation for an actual reason. The fourth one is, and this one people pontificate about morning to night, is your inability or lack of desire to get a Beatley mop top haircut, and I know you've stated that you were never asked to change your hairstyle. And here's a thing that I find very interesting about the Beatles universe, especially the early days when they were trying to figure out whose loyalty they could really have, is they would have this silent test. And I feel like Neil being asked to come with you for the sacking was they were doing the same thing to Neil. Let's see which side of the fence Neil falls on. Because everything I've gathered was that George was never actually blatantly asked to change his hairstyle. He just did it. And it was like a silent test of camaraderie and all for one and one for all. And you didn't bite, which, much to your credit, you're an individual with your own tastes, your own likes and dislikes. And you had this really sweet looking Tony Curtis type coif that looked great on you. And I believe, I could be wrong, you did sit with Astrid and you gave the hair thing a shot. You didn't like it, and that was that. But the passive-aggressive, it's like if you're with a spouse who's passive-aggressive, who's silently keeping track of all of her disappointments without bothering to air any grievances. They had taken note of your decision and filed it in their back pockets.
Yeah, okay. I never sat with Astrid. Okay. There was no involvement, okay. So, she was solely responsible for Stu. To prove a point, because I'd had this rammed down my throat for so many years afterwards, it was the hairstyle. When I went out to America, I made a conscious decision that I would change my Tony Curtis into something which was very similar to a Beatle mop top. Okay. And I combed my hair down for length of time I was in the States, and most probably for about 12 months afterwards. Okay. So I turned around and say for a period of about 18 months, I combed my hair down. Right? That was solely to prove to people, right? Dispel this myth. He wouldn't wear his hair down. Okay, it was too curly, right? I combed it down. I wore it like a Beatle mop top, right? Like most kids in America. Okay, it was long, hanging down my back, a big fringe, typical mop top style, okay, which was going on globally since the advent of, the Beatle hairstyle, right? And it had manifested itself because all of a sudden, the world had been anti-long hair. Now it was pro-long hair. So every kid was wearing the Beatle haircut. Long ponytails, all this kind of stuff. It's just to prove a point. Okay, I wore it. Okay, I wouldn't say now and say I was enamored with it. Okay, I wore it, and it was very much a case of like, well, fine. I think I proved the point, and I started sweeping it back up again.
This episode is brought to you in part by Bespoke LA. Located in the Fairfax district of Los Angeles, Bespoke LA is the modern podcaster's dream come true. It's got 2 podcast pods available, one with audio only and the other with both audio and video. Just think, you can start your own podcast tomorrow without investing a single penny in equipment. What, you don't have experience editing? Don't even sweat it. For an additional fee, Bespoke LA can edit your podcast. Or not, it's entirely up to you. Rates start at $75 an hour with discounts if you book 4 sessions at once. Go to bespokela.com/podcast. That's BSPOKELA.com/podcast for more information or to book your time today. And be sure to tell them that Dave sent you for a one-time 25% discount. You know, it's interesting, as I'm ingesting all this stuff, I'm thinking, just imagine Pete in the band in 1967 being endlessly hounded to drop LSD and grow a mustache. Right, but at the time, I mean, these are John, Paul, and George. They're three of the most indefatigable individuals that ever walked through the music industry, but yet they always did what each other did. There was always a sense of the collective over the individual. And I think one of the things that made you an appealing member of the Beatles was that you marched to the beat of your own drummer. You know, if you'll excuse the pun, you know, you kind of had your own thing. And I think that that was an intriguing element within the context of the Beatles. Tell me about the band chemistry angle. So the idea has been planted, and I don't even necessarily mean in a negative sense, that you like to do things on your own, that, you know, even when the band would go out drinking, they would go out drinking together, and you had a girlfriend at the time who, I think her husband was in prison, right, in Hamburg, and you would go drinking with her, or you just had more of a loner type personality. Is that totally unfounded?
No, it's not unfounded, but we all had girlfriends. You know, here's us, and there's Pete doing his own thing, right? They had girlfriends in Hamburg. You know, I'm not the only one who had girlfriends in Hamburg, right?
Yeah.
But again, it's this segregation thing. It's like, you know, let's do what we can, or the Beatle media, or the Beatles historians, or the idiots who write stuff about the Beatles, right? Let's put Pete in a box where he's a total loner. Let's make him look as though, fine, all the others are pristine, they never had girlfriends. But Pete's going out with a married woman. Wow. You know, come on, guys, give me a break, will you? We've got kids in Hamburg.
Yeah.
Right? We're healthy young men.
Yeah. Also the drug thing, which, by the way, I credit you on this because there had to have been a hell of a lot of peer pressure. The guys were really into Prellies, you know, the Preludin, to keep themselves awake, which is understandable. And I got to hand it to you. I don't know where you found the energy to do all those sets, those endless hours of playing without any, I mean, I know you drank, but without the use of any substances. You know, and John, I know he would always take more than the rest of the guys. And in fact, there's one photograph that is the only photograph in the history of the Beatles that ties them into drug taking. And it's that one where, you know, you're even holding a tube of Preludin.
Yeah, it's with Vincent. Yeah.
Yeah, with Gene Vincent. Yeah. So that was another angle. He doesn't do drugs. We like our drugs. And I mean, I know there wasn't marijuana or LSD at the time that had really found its way into the band.
Yeah,
But
there were pep pills, you know, nothing more than that. No, as it turned around and said, I wasn't into the drug scene. But, you know, that led a sportsman to life. I drank, you know, because prior to joining them, I was a clean athlete and played rugby, swam, you know, championship swimming. I could fire. And again, it's your own personal character and your own, you know, physical attributes. I could fire on schnapps and whiskey and beer. That'd keep me going all night, right?
did they try to get you to take some of the Preludin? Were they on you?
Yeah. They were there. If I wanted to take them, I could have done, you know. You only had to go and see Mutty in the toilet, right? If you ran out, she'd, I have some, don't worry. You know, but I never grabbed me, right? It was fine. I got my kicks out of playing, drinking, you know, that's fine. You know, I can fire on that. I can be as crazy as them on stage doing exactly my own thing and enjoying what I'm doing without going in and taking pep pills to do something.
So then the very last possible reason for dismissal was Mona, at 37 years old, is pregnant following a liaison with one of the Beatles' inner circle. Of course, it's not just their inner circle. He was your best mate, not to mention the father of the child, your stepbrother Rogue. And it was none other than Neil Aspinall himself. A lot of people don't know that. And all of that would feel overwritten even for a daytime soap opera. And if it wasn't the reason for your dismissal, it still must have thrown some kind of kink in the works, I would imagine. Because, you know, now you're put in the position of having to take care of your new baby brother because his dad was leaving on tour with the Beatles, who were featuring their brand new drummer. I mean, that had to sting. I know for me, like I said, I'm very envious that you had the constitution that was, as much as it had to have been painful, you were able to withstand that and become a stronger person on the back of that experience.
Yeah, okay. You've got to remember, with the advent of road coming along, okay? Don't get me wrong that all of a sudden I became a babysitter because it was Neil's kid, right? Neil and my mother's baby. I was out on the road as well, so the chances are Rogue saw about as much as me in his infantile years as what he did of his dad, right? Because I was on the road up till 68, till I got married and settled down and changed direction. So, he would have seen me as okay, there's this guy who comes in, he plays drums. I see him one night, he kisses me, hugs me, has a laugh and a joke with me, and the next day he's gone, And then, oh, hang on a minute, here comes my dad. And he does the same thing, and he's gone. But then all of a sudden, Big comes back, right? And that's the way it went. But that's a crazy day in the life of the Best family. Okay, I'll leave it at that. A crazy day in the life of the Best family.
It's interesting because, that's normal for you because it's your life. But, just reading about it, I'm like, how do you even compartmentalize all this stuff to get from one day to the next? I got to hand it to you. I really do. Right out of the gate, from, the first couple of weeks after you'd been sacked. What I had read is that except for the performance at the Cavern Club, which is their first spot in front of the TV cameras for the very first time, you sat home for a couple of weeks, not wanting to face anybody, and answer any questions about why it happened. Was that basically it? Were you at home just trying to lick your wounds right out of the gate?
Yeah, very much so. Because of what happened and circumstance, and because, there's a lot of fan reaction. And I explained to them, just give me some time. Give me some time to try and work things out for myself. Fortunately, my fan base did. They respected, my wishes. So I got time enough to basically, sort of think things, put them into perspective, decide what I was going to do. And that's when I made the conscious decision to join Lee Curtis and the All-Stars.
That's great. Okay, that's great. So you emerged from that experience knowing your direction forward, and it seems like that Brian had used the August 22nd deadline of them appearing in front of TV cameras for the first time and basically, securing the image of them as the band that they wanted to be from that point forward. And you were there. You were at the club. You popped in, right? And left real quick?
Yeah, because of, I couldn't handle the pressure that was going on. Too many questions from the kids, because they were still under the impression that I left the band and they couldn't quite get to grips with, there's a television production coming up and you're not part of the band. Okay.
Right.
But before we wrap this one up, Dave, I just want to turn around and say there's a new project that we're involved with, okay, which is the Casbah Coffee Club Suites. And you want to know about Pete and Rogue's life? This is bringing you right up to date with it, okay? Above the famous Casbah Coffee Club is our house, the old family home, which we have now converted into Casbah Coffee Club Suites. The 5 rooms, 5 suites, Leonard Suite, McCartney Suite, Harrison Suite, Best Suite, Sutcliffe Suite. It's where the Beatles ate, slept, played, frolicked. We are open to the public. We are now open to the public. Airbnb, August 1. Our public launch is going to be the 21st, but we are open to the public now. So for all your Beatle listening audience, okay, all your non-Beatle listening audience, get yourselves down to the Casbah Coffee Club Suites. Check out Airbnb, see it for yourselves, and we'd love to see it. We will entertain you royally when you get over here.
All right, that about does it. If you enjoyed this episode, please Venmo Gebro. I repeat, Venmo Gebro at David-Gebro, Gebroe. Please keep in mind this is entirely how I support my wife and my 5-year-old son, so don't risk feeling badly about yourself by not giving. Venmo me a tip at David-Gebro. Stay tuned, because next week we've got episode number 1 of our immense Beach Boys podcast series, And Your Dreams Come True, which I've been threatening to unleash for quite some time now. The series kicks off with a 2-part interview with original Beach Boy David Marks that I absolutely promise you will never forget as long as you live. That's right, 2025 week 1 we had a Beatle, and week 2 a Beach Boy. No more messing around. Okay, here's the week up ahead. This Sunday, our weekly show within a show, the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound podcast, drops for our Patreon's private tier. These are real people with talent and a burning fire deep inside, just like you and I. Then, come Monday, author of the indispensable tome, Becoming the Beach Boys, James B. Murphy, will be here to talk about the band's origin story all the way up to 1962. Truth be told, this is episode 1 of And Your Dreams Come True, so don't miss it, or you'll only be getting part of the story. And then on Wednesday, the Lieutenant tier gets their early release, ad-free director's cut of part 1 of the David Marks Discograffiti interview. It's the show as it was truly intended to be heard, with all the essentials left intact. And then come Friday, all the rest of you penny pinchers get to join in on the action. A heartfelt Discograffiti thanks goes out to my beautiful wife and son, Jen and Mason, Pete Best, Rudy Fishman, Becky Boyd, Jay Schultz, Bespoke LA, my mom, my dad, my incredibly loyal fans, and especially the entire Patreon community, the Soldiers of Sound. I love every last one of you, and this show would not exist without you, my friends. Speaking of friends, it's high time for some new ones. They're in our Facebook group, Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound. That's the best way to find out what's coming up on the show, but there's a hell of a lot more. You get recaps of the day in music history, the ability to pitch questions to guests, polls that put you in the driver's seat on guest and band decisions, access to a thriving creative hub if you're looking for a collaborator, and much, much more. So make sure you don't miss out. You can find the link to the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound Facebook page right there in the show notes. And if you don't mess with the Zuck, no sweat. Just email me at info@discograffiti.com and I'll keep you in the loop. So now that it's done and you want more, another way to dive even deeper into classic rock and roll from the 1960s is to leap headfirst into the Righteous Brothers Bill Medley interview. That's episodes 181 to 182. My interview with the Free Design. That's episodes 160 to 162. My epic interview with the Mamas and Papas Michelle Phillips. That's episodes 141 to 159. Blood, Sweat, and Tears. That's episode 137. My 12-hour interview with Terry Kirkman and Jules Alexander from The Association. That's 109 to 113. Vashti Bunyan rating her own output. That's 103 to 104. Sergio Diaz from Os Mutants. That's 86 to 87. Bert Summer, that's 83 and 84. Sweetwater, that's episode 79. David Crosby, 77 and 78. Andrew Tuttle rates the Monks, that's 74. Jim Florentine on Black Sabbath, that's 64 to 68. Lou Barlow on the Zombies, that's 59 and 60. Marvin Gaye biographer David Ritz rates Marvin Gaye, that's 45 to 47. Blind Faith is 43. Anthony Fantano rates the Velvet Underground as 32 and 33. Bob Forrest rates the band, that's 25 and 27. Monkees manager Andrew Sandoval rates the Monkees, that's 22 and 23. Don Randy rates David Axelrod, that's 17. Badfinger is 16. The Bee Gees is 10 and 11. Sly and the Family Stone is 5, 6, and 7. And Pink Floyd is 1 and 2. And of course, be sure to mark your calendars, because next Friday, January 10th, 2025, we're coming at you with a soon-to-be legendary David Marks interview. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss it. And so, from now till then, don't let our youth go to waste, lads and ladies. It's Discograffiti!